Airline staff treat black woman unfairly. Then she exposes herself as an undercover FBI agent. Have you ever been so close to unleashing your inner strength but held back, waiting for the perfect moment? That's the kind of tension brewing in today's story. It's about prejudice rearing its ugly head at 30,000 feet, only to be shattered by an unexpected display of true power. It all starts with a quiet passenger, initially unremarkable except for the color of her skin and an envelope she clutches like a secret. When the flight attendants singled her out, they thought she'd crumble. Little did they know, this woman's hidden identity was about to turn their entire flight upside down. Vanessa Carter woke up that morning with her heartbeat drumming an odd rhythm, equal parts nerves and anticipation. She had a secret mission concealed in the folds of a routine work trip, a secret that made her lips curve into the faintest smile whenever she thought about it. Today she would be boarding a Delta Airlines flight from John F. Kennedy International Airport to Los Angeles. Anyone looking at her suitcase would think she was just another busy professional rushing to a business meeting, charcoal grey suits, a neatly folded blouse, and a pair of practical heels. But hidden at the very bottom of her bag was something that set her apart from most travelers. It wasn't contraband, nor was it illegal in any way. In fact, it was entirely authorized part of her everyday carry as a federal agent. Yet, no one on that flight, no one in that terminal could suspect Vanessa was an undercover FBI agent on a delicate assignment. She entered the vast terminal of JFK, scanning the bustling crowd like a detective observing a crime scene. Children clung to their parents' hands, couples said tearful goodbyes, and business people chatted incessantly on phones. Over the airport's loudspeakers, the soft but insistent voice announced departures and arrivals, weaving a tapestry of movement and urgency. Despite being an old hand at traveling under various aliases, ranging from mild-mannered schoolteacher to marketing consultant, Vanessa felt a prickle of excitement. This time, her mission was personal. There had been a spike in discriminatory incidents reported on certain flights across different airlines, but one particular flight crew on this Delta route had garnered a serious complaint from a high-ranking official's family. The FBI suspected there might be more at play than just prejudice, possibly some unscrupulous smuggling ring, or at the very least a severe pattern of harassment that could blow up into a legal nightmare. Vanessa was tasked with investigating without drawing attention. Standing at the self-service kiosk, Vanessa printed her boarding pass. She'd purposefully booked a middle seat in coach, suspecting that cramped conditions often brought out the worst in people, especially those who harbored hidden biases. Taking a seat near the gate, she pretended to engross herself in a paperback novel. It was an old habit, scanning the crowd over the edges of the pages, collecting expressions, gestures, and micro-moments of tension. That morning, she'd styled her hair in a sleek bun, put on minimal makeup, and chosen a simple blouse beneath a light jacket. She wanted to appear respectable, yet unassuming. Blending in was her specialty, something she prided herself on. And for a moment, it seemed the morning would go smoothly. People around her were mostly minding their business. A few gate agents hurried past, checking tickets with efficient politeness. All was calm and routine. Then she observed the first subtle red flag. A pair of flight attendants approached the gate counter. They wore crisp navy blue uniforms adorned with Delta's insignia. One of them, a woman in her mid-40s with a blonde pixie cut, exuded authority that felt a notch too stern. The other, a younger brunette with an anxious flicker in her eyes, seemed to follow in the first attendant's shadow. Vanessa's instincts kicked in when she saw the stern attendant glance around and, upon meeting Vanessa's gaze, quickly look away. There was something guarded in that stare, something borderline hostile, but it was only a fraction of a second, so fleeting that most people would have dismissed it. Vanessa filed it away under potential issue. The boarding process began. Families with small children and passengers needing assistance were invited first. Gradually, the lines swelled. Vanessa joined the queue. Right behind her was an elderly man with watery eyes and trembling hands who kept dropping his boarding pass. Vanessa bent to help him pick it up. He gave her a grateful smile. "Thank you, miss," he said softly. "These old hands aren't as steady as they used to be." Vanessa smiled. "No problem at all. Where are you headed?" She had an ear for conversation, always fishing for small details, bridging human connection in the subtlest ways. "My grandson's graduation in Los Angeles," he replied proudly. Before she could respond, the older flight attendant with the pixie cut, whose name badge read Marjorie, stepped in front of them. She gave a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach her eyes and waved the old man to one side. "Sir, you can step over here if you need extra time." She made it sound almost scolding. Then she pivoted her attention to Vanessa. "And your boarding pass?" Vanessa handed it over. She could tell Marjorie was scrutinizing her, as if scanning for anything amiss. The flight attendant's eyes darted to Vanessa's hair, her skin, the shape of her face. It was an old story Vanessa knew all too well. That suspicious once-over she'd encountered more times than she cared to remember. Still, she feigned a polite smile. "Okay, seat 17B, Marjorie said, returning the boarding pass with an air that suggested she was doing Vanessa some grand favor. "Don't hold up the line." Vanessa stepped into the jet bridge. The temperature dropped slightly, and the enclosed space filled her nostrils with the scent of recycled air mixed with an undercurrent of jet fuel. She tried to shrug off the uneasy feeling. Maybe she was overthinking Marjorie's attitude, but given her assignment, she resolved to stay alert to every microaggression and questionable gesture. This was precisely why she was here, to observe, document, and if necessary, intervene. As she stepped onto the aircraft, the younger flight attendant, whose badge read Alicia, forced a polite smile. "Welcome aboard," she said, her voice shaky. She gestured for Vanessa to turn right, down the narrow aisle that led to the economy cabin. Vanessa offered a genuine smile in return, hoping to put Alicia at ease. Something in that young woman's eyes suggested she was operating under instructions she didn't entirely agree with. Inside the plane, the air was cooler, the seats a uniform blue-grey with small screens set into the headrests. The overhead bins were already beginning to fill up with luggage. Passengers jockeyed for position as they tried to stow their carry-ons. Vanessa spotted row 17. Her seat, 17B, was between a woman wearing a bulky coat, despite it being mild spring weather, and a sullen teenager with oversized headphones. She quietly slipped into her seat, stowed her carry-on overhead, and pulled out the same paperback she'd read at the gate. The cabin soon filled with more passengers, each bringing their own little dramas. A mother wrangling a crying toddler, a businessman frantic about a conference call, an anxious honeymoon couple double-checking their passports. Through it all, the flight attendants made their rounds, offering assistance. Yet Vanessa couldn't help noticing that whenever Marjorie passed her row, the older attendant's gaze lingered on her just a moment too long. It was disconcerting. Finally, the boarding door closed with a loud clank, sealing them in for the cross-country journey. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, welcoming everyone on board Delta Flight 1435. Scheduled for a 5.5-hour flight to Los Angeles International Airport. He briefed them on expected turbulence and flight conditions. Then Alicia and a male attendant began the safety demonstration. Meanwhile, Marjorie paced the aisles, as if on patrol. Vanessa pretended to be absorbed in the safety instructions, but her mind was working overtime. She noticed Marjorie pause at row 15, then at row 16, each time casting a side glance at Vanessa. Eventually, she reached row 17 and tapped the overhead bin above them, making a point to check if it was securely closed. Then she looked down at Vanessa, "Ma'am," she said, her tone dripping with cool politeness, "are you aware of our baggage policy regarding prohibited items?" Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "Yes, I am." "Good," Marjorie replied, not moving. "Because if there's something you shouldn't have in your carry-on, you need to inform us now. It would be a grave issue if it's discovered mid-flight." A few passengers nearby turned to look. Vanessa could see the teenager's eyes darting from the corner of his peripheral vision. The woman in the bulky coat shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "I'm aware," Vanessa said calmly. "I have no prohibited items." Marjorie gave a short, curt nod. "Fine. Let's keep it that way." Then she moved on. Vanessa's pulse quickened, but she maintained her composure. What was the point of that exchange? Did Marjorie truly suspect she was smuggling something, or was this a thinly veiled intimidation tactic? It wasn't overtly racist, but the subtext was apparent. She quickly jotted down a mental note. Harassment begins. This might be the first tangible sign of the prejudicial behavior she was sent to investigate. The flight took off smoothly. The engines roared, the cabin vibrated, and the ground fell away beneath them. Vanessa felt the familiar press of acceleration. Once they reached cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign chimed off. Passengers relaxed, some dozing, others flicking through in-flight entertainment. The beverage service began, with Alicia gingerly pushing the cart down the aisle. Her face looked strained, as though carrying a silent weight. Vanessa waited, anticipating an uncomfortable interaction when they reached her row. But Alicia paused at row 16, bracing herself. Marjorie came up behind her and took over, stepping forward with the cart. She wore a tight-lipped smile and began to take drink orders, handing out sodas and water with mechanical efficiency. By the time she reached row 17, Vanessa's row, her cordial facade had noticeably thinned. The man in the aisle seat, an accountant-looking type with wire-framed glasses, asked for a ginger ale. The bulky-coated woman next to Vanessa asked for a coffee. Then Marjorie turned to Vanessa, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "And you?" she asked. "What would you like to drink?" "Water, please," Vanessa said. Marjorie paused, as if expecting something else. She held out a plastic cup half filled with ice, then poured water from a metal pitcher. As she handed it to Vanessa, the water sloshed and spilled onto Vanessa's tray table. Some of it splattered onto Vanessa's blouse. A wave of cold spread across the fabric. "Oh, I'm sorry," Marjorie said, but her tone lacked genuine remorse. She handed Vanessa a napkin. It felt more like a test than an accident. Vanessa patted her blouse. "It's okay. It can happen," Marjorie said. Then she moved on as if it was no big deal. The contact had been brief, but enough to confirm Vanessa's suspicions. Marjorie was targeting her. The question was why. Was it pure racial bias, or was there something deeper? After a while, the lights dimmed for the in-flight entertainment. Most passengers settled into their personal screens to watch movies or doze. Vanessa took the opportunity to discreetly observe the cabin. Marjorie lingered near the galley, occasionally checking on passengers, but never missing a moment to glance at Vanessa. Alicia, on the other hand, seemed fidgety, as if torn between duty and conscience. Their dynamic intrigued Vanessa. She sensed Alicia wasn't comfortable with Marjorie's behavior. An hour into the flight, the seatbelt sign suddenly came on. A patch of turbulence rattled the cabin. Passengers gripped their armrests or trays, a few gasps echoing in the silence. Vanessa, used to flights in every kind of weather, remained calm. The turbulence wasn't severe, just a rough patch. Then, without warning, she felt a foot slam against the back of her seat. She turned around to see who it was. A young man, wearing a hoodie and slouching low, scowled at her. "Quit pushing your seat back," he snapped. Vanessa's seat wasn't even reclined. "It's upright," she said calmly. He muttered something under his breath. She decided not to engage further, focusing instead on the bigger picture. Then Marjorie appeared behind the young man, her face set like stone. Is there a problem here? She demanded, pointing her gaze straight at Vanessa rather than the instigator. The young man in the hoodie shrugged, but her attention stayed fixed on Vanessa. No problem, Vanessa replied. He just kicked my seat. Marjorie's lip curled slightly. Maybe you were leaning back more than you realized, she said in a clipped voice. Then she directed her gaze to the young man, who raised an eyebrow but didn't respond. Without waiting for any clarification, Marjorie turned to Vanessa again. Let's maintain a comfortable space for everyone. And just like that, she left, issuing a non-verbal reprimand, as though Vanessa were the troublemaker. Vanessa fought the urge to roll her eyes. This was becoming a pattern. Anything that happened in her vicinity was assumed to be her fault. She inhaled deeply, reminding herself to keep calm. She was here to document these incidents, not to blow her cover in a fit of anger. 2 hours into the flight, meal service began. Trays of microwaved pasta, chicken, or vegetarian options were rolled out. Vanessa was expecting further friction, but was somewhat surprised when Alicia brought her meal with a small, genuine smile. "I'm sorry about all that earlier," Alicia murmured under her breath. "I hope you're all right." Vanessa nodded, grateful for the small kindness. "I'm fine," she whispered back. She wanted to ask Alicia if Marjorie had a history of such behavior, but timing wasn't right. Instead, she quietly unwrapped the plastic from her meal. The food was bland, typical airline fare, but edible enough. Eventually, the cabin dimmed again, suggesting that passengers try to rest for the remainder of the flight. Vanessa used the lull to reflect. She wondered if what she'd witnessed so far was enough to justify the complaints that had reached the FBI's ears. The spilt water, the undue scrutiny, the misdirected blame, all overshadowed by the subtle undertones of hostility. It might not sound like much in a formal report, but prejudice often manifested in precisely such microaggressions. And if there was a bigger issue at play, like contraband smuggling or orchestrated harassment, she hadn't seen direct evidence yet. She decided to get up and walk to the lavatory at the back of the plane, partly to stretch her legs, partly to see if she could overhear any revealing conversations from the flight crew. She excused herself past the seated passengers, careful not to disturb them. As she walked down the aisle, she felt eyes trailing after her. She glanced back, seeing Marjorie whisper something to another passenger. She caught snippets of the conversation all over the place and, thinking she owns it. Vanessa's cheeks burned, but she forced herself to remain composed. At the rear galley, she found Alicia pouring coffee for herself. The young flight attendant looked up with surprise. "Oh, hi. Did you need anything?" Her tone was polite, but there was a hint of warmth that suggested real concern. "Just stretching my legs," Vanessa said, "and maybe a cup of water if it's not too much trouble." Alicia quickly handed her a fresh cup of water. "Listen," she said in a hushed tone, flicking her eyes toward the front of the plane to ensure Marjorie wasn't around. "I can see she's giving you a hard time. I'm sorry." Vanessa took a small sip. "I appreciate that," she replied gently. "Does she do this often?" Alicia hesitated, her posture tense. She glanced around. "I'm still pretty new," she admitted. "I've only been on 3 flights with her, but it's been like this every time. She picks a passenger, usually someone who's black or Latino, and she just, I don't know. She finds faults, makes snide remarks. It's uncomfortable." Vanessa nodded, a swirl of anger and empathy welling up inside her. She'd encountered this type of behavior before, in everyday life, as well as during her investigations. She had the power to stand up to it, but revealing her true identity too soon could compromise the entire mission. "Thank you for telling me," she said gently, gauging Alicia's sincerity. The young woman's eyes brimmed with relief, as though unburdening a secret she'd held for too long. Just then, Marjorie appeared from around the corner, her face pinched with disapproval. She glanced at Vanessa. Then Alicia. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice tense, as though she'd interrupted some conspiracy. Just needed some water, Vanessa said evenly, holding up her cup. Marjorie's gaze dropped to Alicia's trembling hands on the coffee pot. She frowned. Alicia, we have procedures to follow. Chatting with passengers back here is unprofessional. I need you to check row 35 for seatbelt compliance. Her tone brooked no argument. Alicia stiffened, nodded, and left the galley without a word. Marjorie turned her attention fully to Vanessa. The hum of the aircraft seemed to amplify the tension between them. We're not a social club, Marjorie said. We have a job to do. Vanessa smiled politely, though her heart pounded. I understand. Thank you for the water, she said, stepping past Marjorie and heading back to her seat. On her way, she noticed a middle-aged black couple whispering among themselves. They looked uneasy, exchanging concerned glances toward the front of the plane. Vanessa recognized the signs of people who had also felt singled out or anxious about potential confrontation. As she passed them, she offered a small nod. They nodded back, relief flickering in their eyes at the sight of an ally, though they didn't know just how deep that alliance ran. Back in her seat, Vanessa tried to rest, but her mind buzzed with every detail. She wondered what lay behind Marjorie's hostility. Was it a personal vendetta or some deeper issue? The flight wore on, the cabin lights flickering between dim and bright as they hit pockets of cloud. Outside the window, the sky was a blanket of night, no stars visible through the haze. Occasional announcements from the cockpit reminded them of altitude and weather conditions. Somewhere over the Midwest, Vanessa drifted into a light sleep. Her training allowed her to rest at will, a skill she'd honed during undercover missions where catnaps were a necessity. She dreamt of a swirling haze of airport terminals, each one bigger than the last, and each with a faceless attendant pointing an accusing finger at her. She awoke with a start when the teenager beside her shifted, jostling the seat. The cabin was mostly dark, except for the faint glow of reading lights here and there. Vanessa realized she was thirsty, so she pressed the call button for a flight attendant. After a couple of minutes, Alicia appeared, her face drawn with fatigue. She handed Vanessa a bottle of water with a whispered apology for the wait. It's been a rough shift, Alicia said quietly. Marjorie's not making it easier. Thank you, Vanessa replied, eyeing the empty aisle behind Alicia. You must be exhausted. Alicia shrugged. I can handle it, but if she goes too far, I'm not sure what to do. Vanessa placed a comforting hand on Alicia's arm. Just document everything, she advised, her voice low. There are processes to handle this sort of behavior. Alicia nodded, clearly relieved to hear someone validate her concerns. She slipped away to answer another passenger's call button, leaving Vanessa alone with her thoughts. The rest of the cabin slumbered or watched movies, blissfully unaware of the tension swirling just under the surface. Vanessa checked her watch. They had about 2 more hours until they landed in Los Angeles. She wondered if the last leg of the flight would offer more insight or confrontation. She hoped that if there was any contraband smuggling happening, it would reveal itself soon. But so far, the only drama she'd uncovered was Marjorie's personal prejudice. Could it be that the official who lodged the complaint had read too much into it? Or was there a more sinister angle hidden beneath these microaggressions? Half an hour later, Marjorie made another pass. She paused at row 17, leaning over to whisper harshly at Vanessa. You realize we can refuse service to anyone who can't follow the rules, right? Vanessa blinked in surprise. I haven't broken any rules. Marjorie's lips curved into a tight, unpleasant smile. We'll see about that. I've got my eye on you. Then she continued down the aisle as if nothing had happened. The words echoed ominously in Vanessa's mind. This was beyond microaggression. It felt like a threat. She took a deep breath, reminding herself to stay calm. She was on a mission, part of which involved exposing exactly this kind of behavior. But she had to be strategic. One wrong move, and she could blow her cover or jeopardize the entire flight. Despite the unsettled feeling in her stomach, Vanessa closed her eyes again, forcing herself to rest. The final hours of the flight crept by, each minute punctuated by the hum of the engines and the occasional shuffle of an attendant. Then, at last, the pilot's voice came over the intercom, announcing their initial descent into Los Angeles. The City of Angels awaited below, a sprawling metropolis of glittering lights and sun-scorched freeways. For many on board, the impending landing was a relief, a sign they could soon leave the cramped cabin and breathe fresh air. For Vanessa, it was a reminder that her window of observation was closing. The seatbelt sign illuminated, and the flight attendants did their final checks. Alicia smiled meekly at Vanessa when she passed by, while Marjorie simply glared, as though resentful that the flight was almost over without having pinned some offense on Vanessa. The wheels touched down with a bump, the reverse thrusters roared, and soon enough, they were taxiing to their gate at LAX. The flight ended with the standard announcements, thanks for flying with Delta, and a request to remain seated until the seatbelt sign was turned off. As Vanessa gathered her things, she caught sight of Marjorie standing by the front exit, bidding farewell to passengers with a mechanical courtesy. She mentally debated whether to confront her or not. The older attendant's hostility was so blatant that Vanessa was sure it warranted a formal complaint. But she also suspected that a mere complaint wouldn't solve the underlying issue. She was here as an undercover agent, after all, to see if there was a bigger picture. So far, she had enough to suspect that Marjorie's prejudicial treatment was a consistent pattern. Whether it tied into something larger remained to be seen. However, it wasn't time to reveal herself yet. Instead, Vanessa quietly deplaned, stepping onto the jet bridge and following the stream of weary travelers into the terminal. The moment she stepped onto solid ground, her phone buzzed a message from her FBI contact, reminding her of a scheduled debrief. She breathed a sigh of relief. The flight was over, but her mission to investigate wasn't. She'd have more flights, more opportunities, and hopefully a chance to see if this was simply one flight attendant's nasty prejudice or part of a bigger network of problems. But she had no idea that the real drama was just beginning. Little did she know, her next flight on the same route, less than 48 hours later, would explode into a confrontation so intense it would shatter any chance of keeping her cover. And when her true identity came to light, the karmic consequences for those who had wronged her would be swift and unyielding. 2 days later, Vanessa found herself back at LAX, checking in for a return flight to New York. Her assignment had escalated after she debriefed her FBI contact. The data pointed to an unsettling pattern of discriminatory behavior by the same flight crew, particularly by one attendant, Marjorie. Reports were piling up, suggesting that her vitriol had targeted multiple Black and Latino passengers, sometimes escalating to threats of removal from the flight. Rumors circulated that certain crew members might be collaborating with unscrupulous baggage handlers to allegedly tampering with or even planting items in the luggage of targeted passengers. Though the agency had not confirmed the smuggling aspect, they suspected something bigger lurked behind this sinister bias. Vanessa's orders now were to book the exact flight route she'd taken before Delta 1435 from Los Angeles to JFK, hoping to encounter Marjorie again. If the suspicious patterns continued, Vanessa would have grounds for immediate intervention. She felt a mix of anticipation and dread. Prejudice was an ugly monster she'd confronted many times, but it never got easier. The sting of that water accident, the sideways glances, and the pointed remarks still simmered in her mind. But she pushed it aside, focusing on the mission. If there was a ring of illicit activity, it needed to be exposed. The airport bustled around her, a non-stop current of humanity. Movie posters and electronic billboards flickered with bright images. while travelers navigated check-in lines with expressions ranging from excitement to anxiety. Vanessa had already checked in online, so she proceeded to security without delay, passing her ID and boarding pass to a stone-faced TSA agent. She wore a comfortable blouse and jeans this time, planning to blend in with the casual weekend crowd. Her cover story for this flight was just as nondescript, a last-minute trip to handle a family matter in New York. As she neared the gate, she spotted Alicia immediately, standing behind the counter with a tablet in hand. A swirl of relief and concern passed across the younger woman's face the moment she noticed Vanessa. Alicia glanced around, ensuring Marjorie wasn't within earshot, then gestured subtly for Vanessa to approach the gate counter. Vanessa obliged. "Hi," Alicia said softly, forcing a professional smile. "Flying with us again, I see." Vanessa nodded, handing over her boarding pass. "Seems that way." Alicia lowered her voice. "Marjorie's on this flight again. She's been worse since we got back. Got into an argument with a passenger yesterday that nearly escalated into a removal." Vanessa's jaw tightened. "What happened?" Alicia stole a furtive look around, then busied herself typing on the tablet as she spoke. The passenger was a young black woman traveling with her child. Marjorie claimed they were being disruptive. Everyone else in the cabin said they were fine. It turned into a shouting match, but the woman didn't budge. She had the sense to record the entire exchange on her phone. That might have saved her from being kicked off. Vanessa felt her anger rise, but kept a calm facade. "Thanks for letting me know." Alicia handed back the boarding pass. "I upgraded your seat to an exit row, more legroom," she said in a louder voice, as if performing official duties. Then, in a hushed tone, "Just be careful." Vanessa offered a grateful nod before moving aside. She found a seat in the gate area, pulling out her phone and pretending to browse social media. In reality, she was opening a secure FBI app to log Alicia's tip. Each new piece of evidence built the case against Marjorie. Officially, the airline might claim these were isolated incidents, but the pattern was indisputable. Before long, the boarding announcement sounded. First-class passengers and those needing assistance were invited to board. Then came those in premium cabins. Vanessa, with her newly assigned exit row seat, was in the next group. She scanned her pass at the gate, offered Alicia a polite smile, and proceeded down the jet bridge. On board, she turned left into the main cabin. The seats in the exit row were indeed more spacious, with extra legroom that felt like a small luxury. She settled into her window seat, stowed her carry-on above, and placed a small backpack at her feet, making sure not to block the exit. The cabin was already half full by the time she sat down, and from her vantage point, she could see Marjorie at the front galley, watching each passenger with that same hawk-like scrutiny. A young couple claimed the seats beside her, chatting about their honeymoon in Hawaii. They seemed polite, casting her a friendly nod before returning to their conversation. Vanessa observed the stream of passengers filing in, mothers with strollers, business types with laptops, a teenage girl lugging a guitar case. Then it happened. A middle-aged black man in a crisp suit boarded, paused near the front, and politely asked Marjorie for directions to his seat. Marjorie looked him up and down, her lips pursing. Vanessa couldn't hear the exchange, but she saw Marjorie point curtly down the aisle, hardly making eye contact. The man frowned but said nothing, heading toward the back of the plane. Vanessa's blood simmered. It was such a small moment, easily overlooked, but it confirmed that Marjorie's attitude hadn't changed. This flight would likely test Vanessa's patience. She remembered her training, remain professional, gather evidence, only intervene when necessary. It was crucial not to blow her cover prematurely, as the FBI needed concrete proof of any possible criminal wrongdoing. But for now, it looked more like blatant discrimination than some elaborate smuggling operation. Once boarding was complete, the doors closed. The plane taxied to the runway, engines humming in readiness. The safety demonstration began, conducted again by Alicia and another attendant, while Marjorie hovered near the front. Vanessa locked eyes with Alicia for a moment during the demonstration, offering silent encouragement. Shortly after takeoff, the flight attendants prepared the drink cart. Vanessa braced herself for the upcoming interaction, but she saw Alicia maneuver the cart toward their row first, wearing an apologetic smile. The newlywed couple beside Vanessa asked for champagne, celebrating their trip. Alicia handed them plastic cups of bubbly and then turned to Vanessa. "Something to drink?" "Water, please," Vanessa replied. She accepted the cup, noticing how Alicia's hand shook slightly. Tension hung between them. They both knew what was coming. Eventually, Marjorie would reach this row or find some reason to zero in on Vanessa. Sure enough, moments later, Marjorie appeared from the opposite aisle, scanning the rows. Vanessa locked eyes with her. A flicker of recognition passed across Marjorie's face. For a second, she seemed thrown off. She must have remembered Vanessa from the previous flight, the passenger she had tried to intimidate. A storm cloud of displeasure rolled over Marjorie's features. Instead of approaching Vanessa, she turned sharply on her heel and busied herself with a passenger in another row. Alicia exhaled quietly. "That's the calm before the storm," she murmured under her breath, just loud enough for Vanessa to hear. Vanessa nodded, sipping her water. She forced herself to remain outwardly relaxed, though her mind raced. She had to be ready for whatever move Marjorie might make next. The seatbelt sign was turned off, and passengers began standing to stretch or use the restroom. Vanessa watched as Marjorie patrolled the aisle, occasionally stopping to scold someone for a minor infraction like not having their tray table up or their bag fully under the seat. Then, without warning, Marjorie zeroed in on the middle-aged black man in the crisp suit who had boarded earlier. He was in row 20, writing in a notebook. Marjorie loomed over him, pointing at his bag, which stuck out a tiny fraction from under the seat. "Sir, you need to push your bag all the way in," she snapped, her voice echoing in the cabin. "You're creating a hazard." The man blinked in surprise, quickly moving his foot to shove the bag further in. "Sorry about that," he said politely, but Marjorie didn't move on. "What's in there anyway?" she demanded, as if she had the right to rummage through his belongings. "It looks overstuffed." The man frowned. "Just business files. Nothing that concerns the flight." Marjorie crossed her arms. "I hope so, because if I see anything suspicious, I won't hesitate to report it." Vanessa's fists clenched. This was intimidation, plain and simple, and she guessed Marjorie was counting on the man's reluctance to cause a scene. Vanessa wasn't the only one watching. Other passengers shifted uneasily in their seats, some clearly disturbed by this display, but the man in the suit merely nodded, forcing a tight smile. "Understood," he said, returning to his notes. At that moment, Vanessa's FBI instincts screamed at her. She wanted to jump up and say something. Instead, she breathed in and out, letting the moment pass. There had to be a reason Marjorie singled him out. Perhaps he reminded her of someone, or perhaps she was just continuing her pattern of targeting black passengers. Vanessa reminded herself that the best course of action was to keep gathering evidence. Things remained tense but quiet for the next hour. The cabin lights dimmed as the plane cruised into the heart of the country. Vanessa, with an overhead reading light, pretended to be absorbed in a magazine. In truth, her gaze flicked from seat to seat, searching for any clue that might confirm suspicions of deeper wrongdoing. Finally, the dinner service began. The attendants wheeled the carts down the aisle. Alicia handled most of the economy section, but Marjorie inevitably drifted into Vanessa's row. The newlywed couple asked for dinner trays, and Marjorie passed them out with forced politeness. Then she turned to Vanessa, eyes cold. "And for you?" Marjorie asked, as if it pained her to be courteous. "I'll have the chicken, please," Vanessa said calmly. Marjorie's hand wavered over the tray. For the briefest second, Vanessa feared another accident, reminiscent of the spilled water. But Marjorie simply handed over the tray and moved on. Vanessa exhaled, half relieved. Perhaps Marjorie had decided not to test her luck. But just as Vanessa began to peel back the foil on her dinner, she overheard Marjorie whispering to the newlywed man beside her, "If she causes any trouble, let me know." Vanessa's blood boiled, but she kept her expression neutral. The man blinked, clearly puzzled. The woman beside him shot Vanessa an apologetic look. They had no idea what Marjorie's deal was, only that something was off. Once dinner trays were collected, the cabin lights dimmed again to encourage rest. Vanessa scrolled through the in-flight entertainment, choosing a random movie as background noise. Sleep wouldn't come easily. She expected Marjorie might attempt another intimidation tactic before the flight ended. And she was right. Halfway through the flight, the pilot announced turbulence ahead. Passengers were asked to return to their seats and fasten seatbelts. Vanessa put her seat in the upright position and secured her buckle. The plane began to shudder, bouncing lightly at first, then a bit more aggressively. Overhead bins rattled, and a chorus of nervous laughter and muffled exclamations spread through the cabin. Marjorie took this opportunity to prowl the aisles, presumably checking compliance. She reached row 20 again, where the black businessman had dozed off. His pen and notebook rested on his tray table. Marjorie rapped on the table. "Sir, tray up," she barked. The man stirred awake, fumbling to raise the tray. The plane jolted, causing Marjorie to lose her balance momentarily. She grabbed the man's seat for support, glaring at him as though it was his fault. "Watch it," she hissed. "I don't want any nonsense on my flight." He gave a bewildered look. "I'm not doing anything," he said, voice tense. Marjorie's voice rose, carrying over the hum of the engines. "Don't talk back to me," she snapped. "I'm warning you." A few rows up, a passenger called out, "Hey, leave him alone." That seemed to incense Marjorie further. Vanessa felt her pulse spike. This could escalate quickly. She unbuckled momentarily, ignoring the seatbelt sign, and stood up. She advanced toward row 20, the plane still trembling with intermittent turbulence. By now, Alicia was also rushing down the aisle, her eyes wide with alarm. "Marjorie, let's stay calm," Alicia said, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's just turbulence." Marjorie spun around, pointing a trembling finger at Alicia. "Stay out of this," she snapped. Then she jabbed that finger at the businessman. "I saw your bag. I want to check it now." The man's eyes went wide with indignation. "You have no right." Marjorie cut him off. "FAA regulations allow me to ensure the cabin is secure, especially during turbulence. So hand it over." The businessman's jaw tightened, but he unzipped the bag. It was filled with folders and documents. Marjorie poured through them, flipping pages as if expecting to find contraband. Passengers around them watched with a mixture of shock and disapproval. But Marjorie didn't stop. She rummaged deeper until she found a metal pen case. She held it up triumphantly. "What's this?" she demanded. "A pen case," the man said through clenched teeth. Marjorie opened it, revealing 2 fountain pens. No threat whatsoever. She tossed it back into the bag. Then she turned to Alicia, who stood frozen nearby. "Reseal this overhead bin," she ordered, pointing. Her face was a mask of aggression, as though the entire cabin was conspiring against her. That was enough for Vanessa. She stepped forward. "You're out of line," she said, her voice firm but calm. "He hasn't done anything wrong. You have no grounds to search his belongings." Marjorie's head snapped around, eyes blazing when she recognized Vanessa. "You again." "I thought so." She chuckled darkly. Always a troublemaker. The businessman looked up at Vanessa in gratitude. Alicia stepped between them, pleading, "Marjorie, let's de-escalate, please. The seatbelt sign is on. Everyone should be seated." Marjorie thrust a hand out, as if to push Alicia aside. "Don't tell me how to do my job." Vanessa took a deep breath. She could feel the tension radiating through the cabin. Passengers craned their necks to watch. The turbulence made the plane lurch again, sending a ripple of gasps through the aisle. Then came the tipping point. Marjorie turned to the businessman, bellowing, "I want you off this plane the moment we land. I'll have security meet you at the gate." The man's face paled, but he kept his dignity. "I've done nothing to deserve that," he said, voice shaking with controlled anger. Marjorie ignored him, reaching for the intercom phone attached to the wall. She pressed a button and announced, "We have a disruptive passenger in row 20. Security will be waiting upon arrival." Gasps and murmurs erupted in the cabin. Alicia tried to intervene, but Marjorie silenced her with a glare. She slammed the phone back into its cradle, her chest heaving. Vanessa felt her own heart pound. This was an abuse of power. She had to act. On her previous flight, she'd endured Marjorie's nonsense silently. But now another innocent passenger was caught in the crossfire, and it was about to turn into a full-blown scandal. Vanessa knew she had enough evidence to implicate Marjorie for harassment, but more importantly, she couldn't let an innocent man face security on false charges. The Bureau had wanted her to remain undercover, but the situation demanded immediate intervention. Consequences be damned. She stepped closer, raising her voice so nearby passengers could hear. "I'm an FBI agent," she declared, pulling a small leather badge holder from her jacket. She flipped it open, revealing her credentials. A ripple of shock coursed through the crowd. Marjorie stared, her face draining of color. You can't be serious." "I am," Vanessa replied, steel in her voice. "And I have witnesses to your harassment. I'd advise you to stand down." Alicia's eyes went wide, her posture collapsing in relief. Passengers nearby murmured in astonishment. The businessman looked at Vanessa with profound gratitude. He clutched his bag protectively, as if it might shield him from the absurdity of what had just happened. Marjorie's anger contorted into a sneer. "I don't believe you," she hissed, but her voice wavered. Vanessa showed her badge again, crisp and official. "I have a federal right to be here, and you have exceeded your authority. Step away from the passenger, now." For a tense moment, Marjorie seemed torn between doubling down or backing off. The flicker of rebellion in her eyes glimmered, then dimmed. She dropped her gaze, still breathing heavily. "Fine," she spat, "but I'm still reporting him when we land." Vanessa nodded. "Go ahead. I'll be there to speak with security myself." Turbulence shook the plane again, prompting Alicia to usher everyone back to their seats. Vanessa sat down beside the businessman in row 20, her presence a protective shield. Alicia quickly checked overhead bins, giving them a grateful look before heading to the galley to secure herself. Marjorie retreated to the front, glaring at Vanessa one more time before strapping into a jump seat. The entire cabin buzzed with hushed conversation. Vanessa could sense the shift passengers who had felt powerless now saw someone stand up against Marjorie's bullying. The hush carried tension, but also relief. The rest of the flight continued with the seatbelt sign illuminated, the plane rattling through periodic turbulence. Vanessa spoke quietly with the businessman, learning his name was Charles Brown, a legal consultant traveling for work. He was shaken but grateful. She assured him he had done nothing wrong and that she would give her statement to security once they landed. When the plane finally touched down in New York, you could almost hear an exhalation of collective relief. Marjorie leapt out of her jump seat the moment the plane reached the gate, and she briskly called for security over the intercom. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and passengers began gathering their belongings. Alicia gave Vanessa a small nod, as if to say, "Good luck." The door opened, revealing two uniformed airport security officers stepping onto the plane. Marjorie beckoned them over with exaggerated urgency. "There he is," she cried, pointing at Charles. "He caused a disturbance mid-flight, refused to follow instructions, and threatened me. I want him off in cuffs." The officers looked at Charles, who stood calmly with his carry-on. Then they looked at Vanessa, who held up her FBI badge. "I'm Agent Vanessa Carter," she said, her voice resonating with authority. "I can attest that this passenger did not threaten anyone. Quite the opposite. This flight attendant singled him out without cause, searched his bag, and made baseless accusations. There are multiple witnesses. I recommend you speak with them before taking any action." Marjorie's face was a storm cloud of disbelief. "She's lying," she exclaimed, turning to the cluster of passengers who had gathered in the aisle, listening. "Tell them!" He was disruptive. He was, but the tide had turned. People stepped forward to confirm Charles's innocence. The newlywed couple recounted how Marjorie had harassed them for no reason. Others chimed in with their own experiences or stories they'd observed. Even Alicia, though trembling, approached the officers, offering her account. She confessed that Marjorie had a history of singling out minority passengers, and that she feared losing her job if she spoke up earlier. The security officers exchanged looks, then politely asked Charles to step off the plane for a brief interview. Vanessa accompanied him, her credentials paving the way. Marjorie trailed behind, practically trembling with indignation. On the jet bridge, the officers took statements from Vanessa and Alicia, while Charles stood by, stoic but shaken. Marjorie tried to interject repeatedly, but each time her voice cracked under the weight of contradictory witness statements. Finally, one of the officers turned to Marjorie. "Ma'am, it appears your story isn't adding up. We'll be filing a report, and you may be subject to an investigation for misconduct. We advise you to remain available for further questioning." Marjorie's jaw dropped. She glanced from Charles to Vanessa, then at Alicia, who stared at the floor, tears threatening. "You can't do this," Marjorie protested, voice rising. "I've worked for Delta for years. I have the authority to maintain order on my flight." Vanessa fixed her with a steady gaze. "That authority doesn't give you a license to harass passengers based on prejudice. And as I said, I'm with the FBI. Any suggestion you tried to plant or fabricate evidence could lead to serious criminal charges." Marjorie's face turned ashen. "1. I didn't. If you have nothing further to say," said one of the security officers, "please leave the area. We'll be in touch." Passengers streamed past them, throwing Marjorie accusatory or relieved looks. Some offered quiet thanks to Vanessa or patted Charles on the shoulder in support. Marjorie stood rooted, her composure in tatters. Alicia slipped away to rejoin her duties, though a weight visibly lifted from her posture. Charles turned to Vanessa once they were outside the jet bridge, in the bright neon glow of a Starbucks sign. "I can't thank you enough, Agent Carter," he said. "I've heard stories like this, but living it is something else. You really saved me back there." Vanessa shook his hand firmly. "I just did my job. I'm sorry you had to endure that. If you ever need to file a formal complaint or statement, I can help." He nodded, relief mixing with lingering anger in his eyes. "I'll be filing that complaint, definitely. People like her need to be held accountable." Vanessa assured him she would back his statement, then parted ways. She had her own FBI channels to handle now. She needed to file a thorough report, detailing Marjorie's behavior and referencing Alicia's statements. Although the immediate crisis was over, the broader investigation was just beginning. If rumors of smuggling or planted contraband were true, there might be other crew members involved. For now, though, Marjorie's reign of prejudice had been brought to a crashing halt. Walking through JFK's terminal, Vanessa felt a mix of triumph and sadness. Triumph because justice had prevailed in a single incident, sadness because so many other incidents likely went unchallenged. But the satisfaction of seeing Marjorie's meltdown, seeing her face the consequences of her actions, was immense. It was a reminder that sometimes bullies only back down when confronted with undeniable authority. Yet Vanessa knew she'd exposed her cover. Word would spread quickly that an FBI agent had stepped in on that flight. Her assignment might shift now, going from undercover observation to direct enforcement. She would embrace that new phase. If anything, the knowledge that an undercover agent could be on any flight at any time might deter others who considered misusing their authority. As she left the secured area of the airport, her phone buzzed. It was her supervisor, demanding a prompt debrief. Vanessa picked up, weaving through the crowd as she explained the basics of what happened. On the other end, her supervisor's voice was a blend of concern and approval. "We'll stand by you. File the necessary paperwork, forward statements from witnesses, and if Delta tries to sweep this under the rug, we'll escalate." Vanessa ended the call with a sense of resolve. She had played her role, and the result was a well-deserved dose of karma for an airline staff member who preyed on innocent travelers. There was more work to do, perhaps an entire ring to uncover if the rumors were true. But for now, she allowed herself a moment to breathe, scanning the throng of new arrivals and departures under JFK's fluorescent lights. In the ensuing days, the story would spread. Passengers with cell phone videos would share them on social media, capturing the confrontation and the dramatic reveal that the quiet black woman was, in fact, an FBI agent. Support flooded in, while certain corners of the internet debated the nuances of airline policies and racial bias. Marjorie was placed on immediate leave pending investigation, and Alicia found the courage to speak openly about her experiences. Charles pressed charges for harassment and, with Vanessa's statement, had a strong case. The airline faced a PR nightmare, forced to reassess its training programs and vow zero tolerance for discrimination. For Vanessa, it was just another day in the life of an agent. Yet it was also something bigger, a reminder that injustice doesn't have to be tolerated, and that sometimes the best way to fight prejudice is to confront it head-on with an unwavering sense of purpose. She thought back to that moment when she'd flipped open her badge in the middle of the aisle, the entire cabin watching. It wasn't just about protecting one passenger. It was about making a statement that no one, no matter how powerful they thought they were, had free rein to oppress others without consequences. She walked out of the airport terminal, the humid New York air hitting her face, and made her way to a parking area where an unmarked bureau car awaited. Her reflection in the side mirror caught her eye. She looked tired, sure, but also proud. In the reflection, she saw more than just an FBI agent. She saw someone determined to stand up against injustice, someone who refused to let the color of her skin define how she was treated. And in that moment, she felt the echoes of a job well done, confident that Marjorie and anyone else like her would think twice before targeting another passenger ever again. We've reached the end of an extraordinary journey. One that shows how a single act of courage can dismantle even the most stubborn prejudices. Each tense moment aboard those flights revealed the power of standing up for what is right, reminding us that silence only protects bullies. Vanessa's undercover mission taught us all that justice may take time, but it remains unstoppable once set in motion. If this story gripped your heart, share it widely. Spread the word about resilience, empowerment, and the importance of defending each other. Don't forget to drop a like, leave your thoughts in the comments, and smash that subscribe button. Be part of a community where we amplify justice and refuse to let intolerance hide behind a uniform or a title. By doing so, we can help ensure that when discrimination rears its head, someone brave will always be there to confront it every single time.